Welcome to week 13 of our class. This week, we'll be wrapping up with the last main grammar point in Module 3 of our book. Next week, we'll be working on some other concepts, but they won't be related specifically to grammar. As we work through our chapter, I like to remind you of this wonderful picture of la cité universitaire, la résidence universitaire, à Paris. Today we'll be talking about adjectives, and this will be a review of what we discussed in week 12. We'll also be talking about the new prepositions of place, les prépositions de lieu. To start out with, it's important to remember that in French, adjectives agree both in number and in gender with the nouns that they modify. What this means is that if the noun that you're modifying is feminine and singular, then the adjective must also be feminine and singular. Similarly, if the noun is masculine and plural, then the adjective has to be masculine and plural. And lastly, if the noun is feminine and plural, then the adjective must also be feminine and plural. What this means is that for each adjective, each description word, there are actually 4 different spellings. There are 3 that have 5, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. We looked at this chart last week, and we talked about the different endings that adjectives could have based on their spellings. Quite often, all you need to do is add an E to the end of the masculine form to form the feminine, an S to the end of the masculine form to form the masculine plural, and an ES to the end of the feminine form to form the feminine plural. There are a couple of tricky ways, however, to get to that initial E for the feminine ending, and those are outlined here. For words like heureux, which end in EUX, happy, we need to change it to EUS before adding the E. After that, we leave the masculine plural ending alone, and we just add the S to make the feminine plural. Similarly, words that end in EUR, like travailleur, also need to change the R to the S before adding the E. Masculine plural just adds an S, and the feminine plural just adds an S. Follows the regular rule. When we add the E to the end of the word cher, which means dear or expensive, we need to add an accent for pronunciation. And again, for the plural, we just add the S. Before adding the E to a word like sportif, we must change the F to a V, and then add the appropriate S's for the plural. For a word like gentil, or intellectuel, or parisien, which all end in a vowel-consonant combination, we need to double the final consonant before we add the E to form the feminine singular. Then, as with all the rest of them, we just add S's to make the plural. We looked at a couple of examples last week. Les filles sont très sportives. The girls are very athletic. Les étudiants sont travailleurs. The students are hardworking. Marie est heureuse. Marie is happy. Frédéric est gentil et Anne est gentille. Frédéric is nice and Anne is nice. And notice you've got 2 different spellings, of course. This is the masculine because Frédéric is masculine, and this is the feminine because Anne is feminine. Chantal est parisienne. Chantal is Parisian. Les vêtements de chez Chanel sont chers. The clothes from Chanel are expensive. We talked last time about the fact that there are 4 adjectives that have 5 forms instead of 4 like all the rest. These adjectives have 2 masculine forms and 1 feminine singular, 1 masculine plural, 1 feminine plural. They were nouveau, beau, and vieux. Instead of going over them here, I'll just remind you to go back and take a look at the lecture from last week. Most adjectives come after the noun they modify. A couple of them come before, however, and the way we can remember which is that adjectives using the mnemotechnique bags come before. That is, adjectives that have to deal with beauty, age, goodness, and size. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that just because you think something is beautiful, for example, blue, because it's my favorite color, does not mean that all times I talk about blue, I put that adjective blue before the noun. If I'm talking about a blue shirt, I'm still going to say une chemise bleue. But if I want to say a beautiful blue shirt, then I'm going to say une belle chemise bleue. A couple of other examples. Nadine et Cécile sont de jeunes femmes intelligentes. I've put jeune, young, before femme because it's an age. Intelligente, no matter how good or bad a quality I think that is not actually the word good or bad. So I put it after femme. Eric et Philippe sont de beaux jeunes hommes travailleurs. Eric and Philippe are good-looking, young, and hard-working men. It's a little weird in English. J'ai un gros chien paresseux. I have a big lazy dog. Not a lazy big dog, a big lazy dog. Just like in English, there's an order to these things. I put big before dog because it is a size. Paresseux, lazy, comes after. Elle porte une jolie robe rouge. She's wearing a pretty red dress. No matter how pretty I think the color red is, I still put it after the word dress because it doesn't directly relate to beauty, age, goodness, or size. Jolie does, however, so I can put that before. Let's move on now to talk about prepositions of place, les prépositions de lieu. We've talked about prepositions before, and we've said that a preposition is a word that explains a relationship between two things. Specifically, a preposition of place explains where one object is found in relationship to another. In the past, I've talked about the desk or the box example. I can walk around the box, I can be under the box, I can stand next to the box, I can stand on top of the box. All of these words, around, under, on top of, explain a different relationship between me and the box. Prepositions of place are specifically locations. So we have these words. Dans means in. Devant means in front of. Sur, on, sous, under. Entre is between. Derrière, you probably already know. Loin de is far from. Près de is near or near to. En face de is facing. Au-dessus de, above. Au-dessous de is below. And à côté de is next to. The two hardest to pronounce are clearly these right here. Au-dessus is above. Au-dessous is below. The one nice thing is that this does have the word sous in it, which means under. Quelques exemples. Le livre de maths est dans mon sac à dos. The math book is in my backpack. Mes chaussures blanches sont sous le lit. My white shoes are under the bed. Attention, ta bicyclette est derrière la voiture. Be careful, your bike is behind the car. Le quad sur le campus est entre la bibliothèque et le bâtiment d'administration. The quad on the campus is between the library and the administration building. One thing that we have to be careful of with the prepositions is that some of them are followed by de. We talked about this earlier, but remember, when you have de and it's followed by a definite article, either le or les, you must make a contraction. De and le together make du. You cannot say de le. De and les, plural, together make des. You cannot say de les. De la is fine, we leave that alone, and similarly, de l'apostrophe is left alone. Some examples of this are these. Le stade est loin du bâtiment d'éducation. The stadium is far from the education building. La bibliothèque est près du centre d'étudiants. The library is near the student center or the sub. Mon cahier est à côté des livres sur la table. My notebook is next to the books on the table. Je place la chaise près de la table. I am placing the chair near the table. So we see that we've got some examples here of this contraction. Here and here and here. I have to say far from the education building. And because I've got de and le together, I have to make du. Again, it is near to the student center. So I have to make a contraction. On this last example, I don't need to make a contraction simply because table is feminine. Je place la chaise près de la table. I place the chairs, or I am placing the chairs, next to the table. We'll be talking more about préposition de lieu in lab. Take the quiz, and I'll see you soon.